We're going to dip into Pythagorean numerology in an amateurish guesswork sort of a way, not having done the full work required to actually present an educated opinion, but simply to confuse the matter, because I've gotten some comments recently that nothing I say makes sense, it's too obscure, it's too esoteric, which is true depending on the subject. Depending on the subject, everything I'm saying is indeed too obscure and too esoteric. But try reading Deleuze, try reading one of these French obscurantists, try reading some ancient alchemical text, try reading the Bible, okay? Try reading the Bible and tell me that everything makes sense, that the fact that they have all these genealogies and the difference between the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and I just saw a dispute the other day. Did Moses have horns? Did Moses have horns? Well, Moses is described as I think the word is karan, and karan can either mean horned or shining brightly. So either his face was horned or shining brightly, and it's ambiguous. So we don't know, there's a lot of esoteric stuff out there. And frankly, I don't think I'm esoteric enough. I don't think I'm obscure enough. The fact that people are even finding my videos is a problem. The fact that I'm not turning people off, the fact that people are still watching the videos is a problem. Clearly, I haven't gone esoteric enough. If I was speaking another language, wenn ich wechseln zum Deutsch oder zum Russisch, I don't know enough Russian to do that. Я сказал русский, Россия. I don't know how to speak Russian. But if I was speaking, if I didn't interplay, if I created my own language, Klingon. I mean, just think about it. J.R.R. Tolkien created these languages in his books, and it's not even necessary to understand the language in order to understand the books, but he went ahead and did it anyway. So guys, this is what it's all about. It's about where is your attention, where is your perception, what's your field of perception? Because to Tolkien, creating languages was an important thing, whereas to the average person, consuming entertainment, which is mundane, which is exoteric, at least seemingly so, superficial. Now, of course, we understand, Jay Dyer will go through Hollywood entertainment and he'll say, well, here's the esoteric symbolism, here's the deeper meaning. So we understand that, but at least it presents itself as being exoteric. The presentation of being exoteric, that's the majority of what people are involved with. Politics is exoteric. Of course, there are esoteric machinations underneath politics, but politics, as it presents itself as, I'm Donald Trump and I'm going to build a wall, or I'm on the left and I'm going to defeat racism, or something. They present themselves in sound bites. I mean, politics, the interesting thing is there is a reverse correlation. We're getting way off track here, but there's a reverse correlation between the complexity of the speech of a politician and the complexity of the overall political system. So back in the day, when you had a small voting base of landowning white men in America, and they voted for the politicians were speaking at a 12th grade level. They were speaking at an educated level. And as the franchise has been opened up, politics has become more complex, because lobbying interests and global interests and multinational corporations, all sorts of machinations have entered into the fold, and so politics is more obscure than ever. You can no longer see where people's true allegiances are. You can't really discern what's going on. It's very complicated, convoluted, and yet politicians speak in a dumbed-down, third-grade language. Trump is very emblematic of this. Trump uses the most brutally simplistic language to the point where he's not even quite speaking proper English anymore. And he has these Trumpisms, these repetitious phrases that you can ask him any sort of question and he'll say something, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. He'll say, we're looking into that. We're really looking into that. You say, Trump, what do you think about North Korea? Well, we're looking into the situation. We're looking into it. We're monitoring it very closely. Trump, what do you think about building the wall? Well, we're really looking into that. We're looking at a lot of different options. So they give these boilerplate answers, we know that things are going on behind the scenes that are actually going to determine the course of politics and policy in America. We know that there are elements that actually have an influence here, but Trump isn't willing, or either he doesn't understand or he's not willing to unveil those machinations. So there is a reverse correlation. The more esoteric your language is, actually, it seems the more learned your language is, the more highfalutin, the more layered and whatnot, the more you present yourself as, I'm a person who is speaking on a higher level. I'm speaking in Latin, essentially, metaphorically or literally. That type of a person and that kind of a system, political system, seems to be more honest, seems to be more laid bare in a sense. It's, and that maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe we could look at, the Roman Catholic Church did use Latin. But remember, at the time, Latin was considered the Vulgate. It was considered the lingua franca. It was considered the common language. So to use Latin wasn't really an esoteric practice, necessarily. Using Greek would have been considered esoteric in Western Europe. Or using Hebrew or something like that. Or using the Futhark. But you have the use of Latin, you have these various things, and basically the point is that I feel like American politicians were much more honest about what was going on and saying, well, look, we have these various factors. We have to consider the oil industry. We have to consider our imperial interests. We have to consider this and that. And they would just, I felt like they spoke more honestly. Not to say that there was no deception going on, but I felt you could see more and more behind the curtain if you were an educated person. And as the language of politics has become more demotic, more of the demos, more populist, it's been the language has been lowered, and so anyone can understand anything a politician is saying in terms of the grammar and the syntax and the vocabulary. But in terms of the substance of the word, the substance has decreased less and less. As you use more highly technical, educated language, you're referencing, very important concepts. This used to be something with the Bible. People would reference the Bible all the time, and you would have to read the Bible to understand what was going on, what they were actually saying. In that kind of learned culture, I feel like there's a lot more substance in what's being said. You can have the phenomenon of purple prose and so on. So again, it's not a perfect theory that I'm putting forward here, but I don't know, there is something to it. You can listen to hours and hours of entertainment. You can listen to unboxing, ASMR. I mean, there's so much content that you can consume that is not obscure, that is not esoteric, that is not referencing things without fully explaining them. You can consume that content, but there's no substance behind it. You're not learning anything. Whereas, I don't even feel like I'm that bad. I feel like maybe I'm referencing concepts that you have to know the background of. But as far as the language that I use, I don't think I'm that bad. If you actually sit down, try to read philosophy or try to, even when I first started coming across words like epistemology, I thought, oh, this is totally obscurantist. Why don't you just call it the question of how we know things, or how we come to receive knowledge or verify facts or something like this? Why do we have to use big words like epistemology? But once you get into it, it's like, epistemology, ontology, deontology, okay, whatever. It's just Greek. You just have to learn a little bit of Greek roots, and then you're good to go. So there is a lot of laziness of people just want to consume entertainment. They don't want to do the work. And what separates the levels of genius, I won't make a black and white distinction here, because genius is a pretty high bar. Clearly I'm not a genius. You're probably not a genius. So geniuses are rare. But I would say there's a spectrum of genius, going back to my last video, and really what it's about is it's your fascination with abstract mental cognitive challenge and the extent to which you're obsessed with solving mental puzzles, whether those be linguistic or mathematical or whatever. You're really intent, and that in solving them is fun to you. Whereas for normal mediocre people, it is fun to engage in acts of consumption, acts of hedonism, acts of visceral pleasure, bodily pleasure, so on and so forth. So this is really what distinguishes people. So people who listen to a convoluted video with technical language and it turns them off, well, that's probably a mediocre person, or more tending toward the mediocre spectrum. People who are willing to engage with vocabulary that is a little bit obscure, those people are going to tend to be more on the genius side. Of course, again, you can use purple prose and have nothing to say. You can go into the thesaurus and you can come up with a synonym for a word that is perfectly adequate, and you can substitute it with something that simply, makes your language incomprehensible. Which is interesting, because if you think about African American vernacular in America, it does often do this in a way. What's the term? To flex. He was flexing on me. What does that mean? Well, it means something like he was bragging, or he was boasting, or he was trying to appear bigger than he was, or he was trying to impress me in some way, or scare me, or intimidate me. He was flexing on me. So in what is it called? African American vernacular, AAV, whatever the politically correct term is. You're always coming up with these new terms to describe concepts that already have words in the English language. We can already describe those concepts, but they're constantly looking for new words to distinguish themselves from the mainstream vernacular. And then you have this phenomenon of hipsters and just white people generally chasing after that vernacular and trying to adopt it. And even you see this in right-wing internet subculture, where they take on, he's based. So this is coming from hip-hop, rap, Lil B, and Lil B came up with this term based, which has some tenuous connection. I mean, even he's flexing on me. What is the image there? He's flexing his muscles. He's trying to impress or intimidate me. So there is a tenuous connection there, and based meaning based in the fundamentals, not up in the clouds, but based, anchored, whatever. So there's a tenuous connection there to existing English meanings. It's not too far off the mark. But then based now means someone who is appearing to be on the left, but really being of the right, or being in a quote-unquote left-wing category, but having right-wing sympathies or something. So Neil deGrasse Tyson, he gives a based tweet. Why? Because obviously Neil deGrasse Tyson is not on the right wing, but he gave a tweet that somehow sympathized with the right wing, and therefore we call it based. There's this book coming out, Based Deleuze, by Justin Murphy, that has come to my attention after the little live stream he did with Joel Davis, and he goes into this, from I think he's in Gen X, so he's giving a kind of Gen X description, and it's funny when we go back into the generations and we start. There's a kind of transgenerational admixture going in here. I feel like Fuentes has this a lot, where he's very much transgenerational. He's using a lot of the vocabulary of Zoomers and a lot of their culture, but then he's also reaching back into like baby boomers and having nostalgia for the 1950s. And then he's, there's even this phenomenon of going back further to the Crusades or something like that. So mixing up this generational aspect is very hyper modern. I mean, the whole idea of having a party where it's like it's the generations party. You have different parties. This is a Halloween theme. This is a Christmas theme. This is a cowboy theme, whatever. And then they have the generations. And it usually starts with the 60s, because people don't like the 50s. That's usually not okay. Although sometimes you have the 50s, but not often. So they'll have the 60s, and the 60s will be, you have to dress up like people did in the 60s. So it's a hippie with the bell-bottom pants. And then you go to the 70s. And the 70s, you've gone out of the hippie and you move to the disco. In the disco, you have the big afro. And, you still have the bell-bottom pants, but maybe they're a little bit tighter, a little more constricted. The 70s, in a way, is sort of a premonition of the 80s, where the 80s is about the yuppie culture, and the yuppies, they're wearing their highly flamboyant, fluorescent latex suits or spandex suits for exercise, because everyone's really concerned about their image and being fit, because in the 80s this obesity crisis begins, and there's this backlash in the form of the fitness industry. And then I guess the 90s would be grunge and emo and goth, and then the early 2000s would be like pop and Britney Spears. So you see sort of these cycles where, the 60s is sort of a relaxed decade, a rebellious decade. The 70s comes in as sort of tightening up that image, getting a little bit tighter, getting a little bit more concerned with self-image. The 80s being a decade, what happens in the 80s? There's Ronald Reagan, there's Arnold Schwarzenegger, there is fitness, there is, again, a tightening up, a conservative age, and then the 90s, which is a rebellion. So you sort of see the build-up. You see 60s as rebellion, 70s tightening up, 80s tightening up, and then 90s a rebellion, a relax, a nihilism. You back to the 60s. And then the 2000s is about coming back, being a little more conservative. So the 2000s, in a way, is very similar to the 1970s or the 1980s, where there was this yuppieism, Britney Spears. You even saw some bell-bottom pants in a way, or some kind of style. In my head, I'm thinking about just a flamboyance. It is a return to optimism after you have this pessimism and depression and grunge and nihilism of the 90s. You then have the 2000s as this extreme backlash of positivity. So you're vacillating between the optimism of the 80s, depression of the 90s, optimism of the 2000s, and the 2010s, which we're now finishing out. I don't know what the 2010s are going to be remembered for, but there is this techno music which has surpassed the techno genre. It's no longer about EDM, electronic dance movement or music. It's no longer about raves, but it's infected every genre, and so every genre is now electronic. Electronic music has colonized all the other genres, and to be acoustic is to be the minority, right? So everything is touched by this electronic, not just distortion in the sense of heavy metal that you got in the 90s or even the 80s, but rather it is a kind of amplification of auto-tune. I think auto-tune, certainly auto-tune was present with Cher. Cher was one of the pioneers of auto-tune. T-Pain had his famous auto-tune track. But now auto-tune has sort of overcome that uncanny valley where it was just beginning, and it was very noticeable. And people would often contrast auto-tune music, which they regarded as trash, with authentic music that would be the majority of music. But now there's this subtle shift which has occurred, that people are no longer aware of what is auto-tuned and what is not auto-tuned, because everything is auto-tuned. Everything is produced, highly produced music. And there's very little that to speak of acoustic music or authentic music, non-electronic music. You're really talking about the fringe, the indie, the minority of music. So, with all of that being said, what does that hold? What do the 2020s look like? Is this going to be a return to the depression of the 1990s? It sort of depends. If you look at the 1990s in terms of economics, the 1990s were not that bad. The 70s clearly had some economic problems. Crime was increasing up until the 1990s. So, it's hard to predict the cultural mood. Is it going to follow economics? Is it correlated with economics? That's hard to predict. But as far as the mood, there is a chance that the 2020s is going to be a kind of return to the nihilism of the 90s, but it's going to be a new form. It's going to be a progression. We're not simply going to go back to listening to grunge and Nirvana and emo and goth or heavy metal or death metal, black metal. It's going to move forward, and I think it's going to transition from the current situation where we have everything electronic, everything is highly produced, everything is hyper modern. It's going to move from that, and it's going to reintroduce a kind of dystopia. I think there is a prescience in the what is called, I'm trying to think of the name, fash wave is one of these words that's been thrown out there, but it's a more fundamental thing than just fash wave. But it's this dystopian Blade Runner sequel type where everything is everything is clearly technological, but it's dystopian. It's not technological in the sense of the optimism that people had for technology in the 1960s or even up through, say, the 1990s. but the technology is going to be viewed in a dystopian way. That's a potential for the 2020s. We don't know. So there's some random predictions we're throwing out there. What we were really supposed to talk about, and I honestly don't have as much to say about it, is this Pythagorean numerology. And I was trying to coordinate the Pythagorean numerology with Christian numerology. So we start in Pythagorean numerology with the monad, the one. This is that which is above both the indefinite and the definite. So by the indefinite, we mean that which is unlimited, that which is without form. So the chaos in the Bible, it says that God was over the darkness of the depths. And the darkness of the depths there is prior to the separation of the waters above and the waters below. So it is kind of this infinite, directionless sea of chaos. And you see this in Norse myth, and you see this in Hindu myth, and you see this all over the world. So it's not unique to the Bible, but that's the one people are most familiar with. So you have this infinite chaos, and then from that infinite chaos there comes a masculine differentiation of night and day, the bigger lights, the smaller lights, the greater, the lesser. Everything is separated and made into distinct, definite forms. So that's the masculine side comes and separates or distinguishes the feminine. In the Norse myth, the giants are feminine. The giants are Chthonian. They are, even though they're big and they're strong, they're still feminine in the sense that Mother Nature is feminine, right? What happens is that Odin and the Aesir, they tear apart the giants, and they take this massive giant, and they differentiate the body and the organs. The brains become the clouds, and they deconstruct this chaos of giantism, and they actually construct the world using the bodies of giants. So this is very similar to when Yahweh in the Bible takes this chaotic, infinite sea, darkness of the depths, and he separates out different elements of it, and he creates definite forms. He distinguishes between the land and the sea. So there is this base, in the Bible, in the cosmology of the Bible, we say that God is the first mover. But he is not necessarily the first thing, and this is sort of a sacrilegious or blasphemous thing to say, but if you just read the words in the Bible and you imagine a picture, there is no implication that God precedes the chaos. Now, we could suppose that in some kind of demiurgic way, he created this chaotic darkness and then he differentiated. That would be one way to resolve the conflict there. But another way is to say that both of these things, both God as the masculine divider and this infinite chaos as the feminine Chthonian element, that both of these sort of existed eternally side by side in the same way that in the Norse myth you have the fire and the ice. They just sort of exist infinitely, eternally, as uncaused things which simply appear in the primordial scene, and then for some reason, some great occasion, beginning of the universe happens, and the fire and ice combine, and they result in creation in the same way that in Genesis, we're looking at this infinite chaos, that we're looking at God the divider, and somehow they collide, and out of that you have creation. So when we look at the masculine and the feminine, we see that they're distinct. We see that we have a duality between them, between the unlimited chaos and the limiting factor of thanatos, of death, of destruction and division. So we have the infinite creative chaos, which is indescribable, and then we have the definite Apollonian form. And above these two, in the Pythagorean system and certain Neoplatonism, you have the monad, which is, how can we take these two irreconcilable paradoxical elements which are against each other, how can we unite them in a totalistic universalism? And that would be the monad. The monad is beyond male and female. The monad is beyond creation and destruction. If that is the monad, then we could call the monad God. We could call the monad God, and we could do that. Or we could say that God is this destructor, he is this divider, and we could say that Mother Nature or something is the infinite creative energy. We could do a more yin-yang, dualistic, Zoroastrian model, or perhaps an Eastern, Far Eastern model, Confucianism or something like that. But in any case, you have you have this concept, whether it's real or whether we can attach any reality to it. We have a concept of a monad, and then beneath that we have the dyad. We have the masculine, the feminine, the definite, the indefinite. And then below that, we have a triad, a trinity, and the trinity is the resolution or the syncretism or the combination of the two elements of infinite creation, infinite destruction, and what do you get? They don't cancel each other out. They don't negate each other. What they actually do is the combination of the two is more than the sum of its parts. So 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 plus 1 equals 3, and that is the trinity, that is creation. So, of course, in the Christian model, you have God the Father being at the top, and then you have God the Son, and that creates a duality of submission and obedience. He who is higher, he who is lower, he who is in heaven, he who is on earth. This is the Christ, Yahweh dialectic, and then below that you have the Trinity, which is the unity of Christ and God the Father, and they become one being. It is one God, and this is a Trinitarian aspect. And the third aspect is represented as the Holy Spirit, that Spirit which unites not only God the Father and God the Son, but also eventually the human race and the human species, which is separate from God the Father, God the Son. So the Holy Spirit is this medium that connects the other two. To humanity. So that would be the fourth aspect, right? So if we have a monad at the top, the undifferentiated combination of every possible thing, and this is sort of the conceptual space or the ethereal space, the space-time, if you will, in which everything exists. If we conceive of something in language, then there must be a syntax. If we say that there is big and small, then this implies that we have a language with which to describe that which is big and that which is small. Okay, so that's the monad. And then you have the dyad, you have the dualistic aspect, and you have maybe Christ and his Father, or you have good and evil, or you have Satan and Christ, or there are many different dialectics we could form here, either a hierarchy of above and below, or it could be good versus evil or something like this. It really depends on the system we're working with. But beneath that we have a synthesis, we have creation, we have salvation, we have all kinds of a synthesis that cannot exist independently in either the masculine form or the feminine form, but they have to come together to have creation. This is in the Norse system, Christian system, whatever. A lot of different systems require that you have this Trinitarian aspect for creation. And then below that, you have the aspect of four. So this is the cosmos. This is the combination of this holy system of masculine God, sky God, earth goddess combined to create creation, which is the whole world, and the cosmos. But the missing element here in that trinity is the mundane, that which is neither the supreme masculine, nor the supreme feminine, nor the entire creation, but it is somehow a piece, a parcel of that creation. In a way, you can think about it as the feminine, the female aspect, is the undifferentiated sea of infinite chaos. The masculine aspect is that which differentiates the chaos from itself, creating land and sea, creating upper and lower, and creating directionality and language. And this then leads to the whole of the world, the whole of the universe, the Big Bang, whatever you want to call it. So these elements combine, creating the whole world. But then within the world, you have individuals, humanity, that interacts with the cosmos. So in a way, the earth is, again, the entire creation is in a sense feminine. Nature is feminine, right? You had the infinite chaos, which was Mother Gaia. You had the infinite decisive power, destructive power, Thanatos. They combine to create the entire universe, and the entire universe, in a sense, takes on a feminine nature. So when God takes the infinite sea of chaos and he creates the heaven and the earth, the heaven is clearly masculine and the earth is clearly feminine. Now you can say in totality they are beyond gender. When you combine both of them, they're androgynous, or having both elements. It's a hermaphrodite creation in a sense, which is true. But if you look at the earth itself is feminine. And so that feminine earth needs a masculine counterpart, and that is humanity. This is why we're called human, because humanity within this system actually has the aspect of masculinity with respect to the earth, which has the aspect of femininity. So we talk about not only Mother Gaia or the feminine creative spirit, this feminine chaotic spirit in a universal sense, but we also hone in on the earth. And so we say that the earth is feminine in itself, and the masculine counterpart to the earth is humanity, which creates differentiation upon the earth. Now we could say that more broadly, not even just humanity, but we could say that all animals, all forms of life, are a kind of masculine counterpart to the raw materials, the raw energy of the earth that we feed off. We feed off the undifferentiated chaos of inorganic forms on the earth to create organic life. That's one way of looking at it. Okay, so that is the quaternary. We've now reached the fourth stage. We've gone from 1, 2, 3 to now 4. 4 being the perfect square, the four corners of the earth. So now we have introduced from the aspect of divine, the divine monad, the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and then finally the Trinity, which is the divine creation in its totality, the universe, which has this divine soul, the universal soul. Then we add on to that the fourth aspect, which is the limited human or the limited animal, that creature which is not divine, which is not a god, but which is clearly connected to the system in some kind of grand scheme. It's not the monad, it's not the divine masculine, it's not the divine feminine, and it's not the whole of creation, but it's a part of creation, it's a spark of creation. And so this is the world of life, the animal world, and the world of humanity. The world of the mundane, essentially. So you've progressed this far, and at this point, we're reaching, and we might have to just turn on some lights here, because, I can't pause the video. You all know that I can't pause the video that is in photo booth with this Macintosh atrocity. So what we have here, I'm back, don't worry. I'm back. And we're up to the 5th level. Now this is something that I didn't understand. I understood the first 4 levels quite intuitively. They made sense to me. But the addition of the number 5 didn't make sense to me. It was like you're just adding a number. That seems to be imperfect. It seems we have a perfect system, and you're just randomly adding something else on, and I didn't like that. But what I started to think of is that we have the 4th, we've gotten to the 4th level, and when we add the 5th, there's really nothing more that you can add, because you have the monad, divine masculine, divine feminine, you have Trinitarian creation, and then you have the mundane, that which is cut off from God, that which is distinguished from God and distinguished from the creation. So there's levels. There's the monad, where nothing is distinguished, masculine, feminine, where you have one distinction, creation, in which you have 3 distinctions, that which is masculine, that which is feminine, that which is created, and then you have a 4th distinction. You have that which is masculine, or you have the monad, that which is masculine, that which is feminine, then you have that which is created in the totality, and then you have the 4th element, which is the part of the creation. The part, that which is not the whole, not totalistic, but it is merely a part separated from the whole. So this feeling of alienation that we have from God or from nature or whatever, this is the aspect of being in the 4th realm. And to connect back to that, we need something. We need to tap into creation, Holy Spirit, whatever, to get connected up the chain through the hierarchy. Okay, so we've reached this 4th level. Now how do we get to a 5th? Well, there really is nothing more, right? I've just described everything in the universe conceptually. I can't go any further. There's nothing further. There's nothing, we can look inside the human, or we can look at the different aspect of the soul. We can say that the 4th aspect is the body of the human, and the 5th aspect. I finished John David Ebert's 21-part series on his lecture on Rudolf Steiner, and I started to think about how Steiner was thinking about different parts of the soul, different aspects, and of course Steiner's writing in German, but there's this translated English term. It's like the body aspect of the soul, the spirit aspect of the soul, and all of these things, which are pretty confusing and convoluted and hard to understand without a visual depiction, so I still don't get them. But just thinking about differentiating all these things, we could keep going. We could split up mind, body, soul. So we could say first the body of the human is created. This is the animalistic aspect. So that would be on the fourth level. And then the fifth level would be, we would say, the mind of the human has been created. And this is something that we see in the animal world. Like animals have some form of mind. And then we say finally there would be a sixth level in which you finally get a soul, being the number 6. But how do you get deeper? How do you get all the way till 10? So I was still confused, and I was looking at this, and then I started to think, well, what if there's a reflective, like think about a body of water, and standing above the body of water is a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. Now if you add up 1, 2, 3, and 4, you get 10. So already we have the perfect number 10 as being, the number of fingers that we have, as well as our base 10 system. So we've already reached the number of 10. We don't need to really go any further. But if we start adding these up, 1 and 2 equals 3. 1 and 2 equals 3. So the natural conclusion, the combination of the monad plus the masculine and feminine equals creation, the Trinity. Now if we add up 1 and 2 and 3 together, we get 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. So the Trinity, when you add it all up together, you get the number 6, which is symbolic. What do we have? The Star of David, right? Or the hexagram. The hexagram is a trinity up and a trinity down. Combined together equals the hexagram. Okay, well, we've gotten to the number 6. Okay, what if we add 1, 2, 3, and 4 now together? Then we just get 10, being the completion of the system. We can stop there. But I was thinking, what if you had a water or a mirror, and you represented each number reflected upon itself on this axis of reflection? You do this in geometry if you're reflecting something across an x-axis. So let's say we have an x-axis and we're reflecting the Pythagorean numbers over the x-axis. So we have the number 1, which represents the monad, the undifferentiation. If we reflect it over the x-axis, we get the 2, the dyad, that which is differentiated. Okay, that's a neat trick. What if we take the 1 and the 2 and we reflect them over the x-axis? Well, we get 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1, and that's 6. So when we get the Trinity reflected over itself is 6. The reflection of the Trinity is the Trinity. When we have 1 and 2 and 3, then we have altogether 6 and 6, then we get 12 altogether. When we have 1, 2, and 3, and 4, then in total we have 20. And if I'm correct, this relates to the Pythagorean solids, and I'm forgetting what they are, like the dodecahedron, I think, is the 20-sided solid. So there's some interesting connections here of 12-sided solid and a cube, for example, is a 6-sided solid. So we talked about that, the hexagram number 6. The cube has 6 sides. Then there's a 12-sided object, then there's a 20-sided object. So that's a very interesting principle. But then I was thinking further, and I was thinking, okay, we're not just reflecting over the x-axis, but then we're also taking the structure that we have, this little triangle, the tetractys, a section of the tetractys, and we're not just reflecting it, but we're taking the top element and adding it below. So if we take our tetractys, our number 10 with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and we take that and then we add the number 1 below, what is that? What are we talking about here? So we've taken the first level, and the second level, and the third level, and the fourth level. So we're coming to the number 5. If we add 1 number below, we're coming to the 5th level. And this is, rather than a reflection, this is repetition. So what if we do this repetition? We do 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we get to a 5th level, and we go back to the number 1. What we've done is we've added the monad back upon this system. So this system, this hierarchy, it seems to be differentiated from, you have the monad, differentiation to the dyad, differentiation to the trinity, differentiation to the quaternary, and then you add back on the monad, and what that means symbolically, numerologically, is it means that this system of four levels of reality is a complete and whole system. That is the statement in symbolic language that we're saying. We're saying that this system is a complete and whole system. That is what the number 5 represents. It says that it is a statement about the number 4. There's that old joke, why was 7 afraid of 8? Or why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. So there's a kind of a pun in there that we can laugh at, but when we look at the relation of 4 to 5, what is the number 5 saying about the number 4? The number 5 is saying this number 4 system is complete. Why? Because if you take this total system and then you add the number 1, you're making the statement that the quaternary system is a complete system, and it is ultimately universal and undifferentiated, and it ultimately has unity in itself. But what happens, because you've added quaternary plus unity equals the quaternary equals unity? That is what we're saying symbolically in our numerology here. But what if instead of adding 1, we add 2? Okay, so we have the quaternary, which represents monad, dyad, trinity, quaternary, and then we have the number 2. What does the number 2 represent? What is the statement that we're making about the cosmos? Because remember, the quaternary represents the entire cosmos. It represents the monad, the dyad, trinity, and the mundane, encompassing the entire cosmos. So if you add the number 1 to the quaternary, you get 5, meaning the cosmos is in unity, which is excellent. It's a great state to be in. It's a great place to be. You have a unitarian cosmos. Everything's in harmony. That's why the number 5 is a harmonious number. But what if we add the number 2? What does the number 2 represent? The number 2 represents division, the conflict between the masculine and the feminine, the Aesir versus the giants, the Olympians versus the Titans. It represents division. So if we add the number 2 to the number 4 in this repetition, we're making the statement that the universe is divided, the universe is in conflict, the universe is in war. And so whereas the number 4 represents the totality of the cosmos, the number 5 represents the unity of the cosmos, the number 6 represents the division of the cosmos. And it is therefore apt that Judaism, which is a religion which says there are 2 types of beings in this universe. There are 2 types of life forms. There are animal life forms, and then there are Jews who have souls. That's the statement of Judaism. Everything in Judaism is about this radical separation between masculine and feminine, the radical separation between Jews and non-Jews, the radical separation between that which is dairy and that which is meat. It's just down the line, the radical separation between different forms of clothing. You can't weave you can't weave goat's hair with sheep's hair. They get very down to the littlest representation here, very similar to Pythagoras. They wouldn't eat beans, okay? And that was an important thing because it had a symbolic meaning behind it. Vegetarianism has a symbolic meaning behind it. And so all Jewish practice has some kind of symbolic meaning behind it. Unlike what Ben Shapiro tries to tell people on the Joe Rogan podcast, it's not simply what it is. And it's not just a pragmatic thing. It's not, they don't eat pork because pork had worms in it and they couldn't adequately cook it. So there's that pragmatic explanation, and then there's a Ben Shapiro, don't worry, it's just, God made up a random arbitrary set of rules and we just have to follow it unquestioningly. Now there's a symbolic meaning behind it, each one of the rules. And each of the rules are numbered as well. So that increases the symbology there. But really, it's about differentiation. It's about saying that there are 2 types of life forms, those who have souls and those who don't. And the only ones who have souls are Jews. And there's this massive distinction. Even though Jews are very similar to other people, many Jews are indistinguishable from Europeans, still they've created this, not even only a species level, because of course, to a Jew, the difference between different species is insignificant. Whether we're talking about a cow or sheep or goat, whatever, they're all animals. The only living creature which is not an animal is a Jew. So there's this radical distinction which doesn't make anthropological sense, doesn't make taxological sense, doesn't make any kind of sense. It's not really qualitative. It's simply based on blood ancestry. Has nothing to do with behavior. People can theoretically convert into Judaism, but certain sects of Judaism don't allow this. And certainly you cannot convert to be Kohanim. You cannot convert. This is an aspect. People say, you can convert to Judaism. You can never convert to be Kohanim. Kohanim means descendant of Zadok. And ultimately Zadok being descended from Aharon. So you have this lineage, this unbroken lineage claimed. We can dispute it, but at least they claim it. You can't just marry into the Kohanim. It needs to be a pure bloodline. You have to have descent to be a rabbi. To now, of course, Reform Judaism will just ignore all of this. But it's still, in traditional Orthodox Judaism, in order to be a rabbi, in order to be a leader of the Jewish community, you cannot be a convert to Judaism. Maybe some Jews can find some examples against this. Oh, here's a historical rabbi who is a convert to Judaism. Maybe you can find that. You'd have to try really hard. And I'm sure that one guy or that minority exists just, as the exception to prove the rule, whatever. So there's this radical separation, which is not based on anything substantial in itself, but is based solely on the principle of radical separation. Now, I have a theory about this principle. When people talk about Abraham as the father of many nations, it makes sense in Christianity because you say, okay, well, Abraham ultimately is the spiritual father of all Christians. There are many Christian nations. Therefore, Abraham is the father of many nations. It doesn't make sense in Judaism. It doesn't make sense in Judaism. Judaism doesn't believe in Christianity. So from a Jewish perspective, Abraham, you'll be father of many nations. Okay, where are all these many nations? Because the Jews are one nation. Even the 12 tribes, they're not 12 nations, they're one nation, 12 tribes. So where are these many nations descended from Abraham? Well, maybe you could say it would be the Arabs or something. But there's still this question, where are the many nations from a Jewish perspective? Are they to come in the future? Where are the many nations? And my perspective, a lot of people view Judaism as an ancestor to Western civilization. First you had Father Judaism or Grandfather Judaism, and then you had Father Christianity, and then you had Western civilization. So in a sense, Judaism is the ancestor of Western civilization. I see it as the opposite. I see, when we look at all these different religious traditions, I see that Judaism was not the progenitor of all religious traditions. So the Vedas precede the Bible by a long shot. So religious traditions influence Judaism, not the other way around. Now, of course, Judaism gives birth to Christianity. Christianity takes over Western civilization. So that's true. It's true. But ultimately, the Jewish religion, Jewish tradition, its mythology, its tales, all of it is influenced and ultimately descends from and comes from older sources, and many of these older sources are Indo-European. So if we're to establish a chronological hierarchy, which came first? Indo-European civilization, Indo-European culture, Indo-European religion, or Judaism, we'd have to say the Indo-Europeans really came first. They came prior to the Jews. Now, there were other non-Indo-European civilizations and religions out there. The Sumerians, for example, the Egyptians, very old, that also influenced Judaism. So we have to ask, is there some kind of quote-unquote Atlantean? I use that in quotes not because I believe in the continent of Atlantis, but simply to refer to the hypothesis that there is some kind of progenitor to all of these civilizations. People have put forth this idea. It's a very Unitarian idea that both the Indo-European and the Finnic Karelian and the Semitic and the Egyptian and the Sumerian, all of these different, and the Dravidian, by the way, and the Dravidian, all of these mythologies, cultures, religions, groups, tribes, whatever, they ultimately descend from a unitary culture, you might say, or a world, I don't know how to say this, but a world creating culture, an originary culture maybe, an originary high culture that came up with all of these myths, and then they became differentiated and speciated and evolved in different geographical locations and changed and distinguished themselves from one another. That's one hypothesis. But we at least have to say that the Middle East, the ancient Middle East, was filled with a lot of different people. And just the fact that we can talk about 12 tribes of Israel already gives us an indication of the diversity of the ancient Middle East. So there were a lot of different kinds of people. And if you look at the modern Middle East, that's still true. There are a lot of different kinds of people. And some of these people are called the Assyrians. And some of these people are called the Coptic Christians. And some of these people are called the Alawites. And some of these people are called the Kurds. Right, so there are these different groups, and how do they maintain their lineage? Because we can do genetic testing on these people. We can see these people are genetic isolates. These people are genetically distinct from their neighbors. Now, how could you possibly maintain something like that in as diverse an atmosphere as the Middle East? Surely everyone should be a paint pot beige. Everyone should be mixed together, and there should be no distinction between one group or another group, because everyone just loves everybody. It's all free love. Well, what actually happens is religion serves as a vessel, as a container, as a membrane to maintain separation between different genetic lineages. So my hypothesis about Judaism is that Judaism developed as a reaction to the diversity of the Middle East. It was a recognition that diversity is death. It was a recognition that if the Jews did not become radical iconoclasts and radically reject everything around them, they would be swallowed up by the genetic soup that surrounded them. So they created this radical iconoclastic religion. Now, does this sound familiar to you? This kind of iconoclasm which is produced by diversity. Well, it shouldn't sound so strange to you, because that's very similar to what we get in Hinduism. Hinduism and the practice of asceticism developed because of this mass diversity in the ancient Indus River Valley. And we take that a step further with Buddhism, which even goes further with the iconoclasm. You know, the Hindu Brahmin, Hinduism as a whole still has a visual culture, but in part it rejects the ascetic ideal being the highest rung on the ladder, rejects the world. And really, the Brahmin in Hinduism are simply they're simply Buddhists. I mean, high caste Brahmin are indistinguishable from Buddhists in the sense that they want to escape the world. They don't want to be attached to material desires. So Buddhism is simply Brahmin for the masses. Buddhism is simply taking the ideology of the Brahmin and saying everyone should follow this. Not just the Brahmin, but everyone. So in a sense, the Brahmin, they've maintained a genetic membrane, a distinction between themselves and the Dalit, for example. They've maintained that through their ascetic iconoclastic religion. Very similar to what the Jews have done. Very, very similar. Now, Europe hasn't had this problem historically, and so Europe has never had to develop this kind of iconoclasm for different groups to distinguish themselves from other groups, traditionally, and therefore Europe has developed as an extremely visual culture. Iconoclasm is pretty rare in Europe for this reason, I would say. If this correlation holds true between ethnic diversity and the need for an iconoclastic differentiation to avoid being swallowed up. So, this is how Judaism gets started. Maybe we could talk about Puritanism. Puritanism, if I'm to classify it in this schema, I would have to say Puritanism evolves as a reaction to the degeneration of the Catholic Church, the Mediterranean power of the Catholic Church. Northern Europeans, they want to distinguish themselves from the Southern Europeans because this is the rise of a renaissance of Germanic civilization. Of course, the Germans take over from the Romans, and they have their kingdoms in Spain and North Africa, Bulgaria, and all over, and in Russia as well, with Novgorod and the Varangians and the Vikings. They're taking over everything. They have Normandy, they have Norway, they have England. So they control everything, but then they sort of relax, and the power of Rome and the power of the Mediterranean, especially with the Spanish Empire and so on, has a resurgence and starts with its overreach into the north, and there is this northern response that takes a form of Germanic ethnocentrism represented by Protestantism, Calvinism, and ultimately Puritanism as a very extreme form, because you do have ethnic diversity within England, and so the most, in a sense, the most Nordic of the Britons, of those being in the southeast, those who are most Anglo-Saxonized, those who are most Nordicized, as opposed to the Celtic inhabitants, even though they speak a Germanic language, the more Celtic inhabitants of the West and of the North. The Puritan stock, the real iconoclasts who reject all of this visual stuff, they want to go back to the literal interpretation of the Bible. It's a Jewish religion. And why is it a Jewish religion? Because it arises in the same way that Judaism arose. It arose as this unconscious desire to separate themselves from other people. Judaism arose in this way. Puritanism arose in this way. The Brahmin caste of India arose in this way. They all arose in order to distinguish themselves, to maintain a membrane, to separate themselves, to prevent their own extinction. So we would then project that if certain demographics are under threat today, might they not turn toward a form of iconoclasm? Something like atheism. And you see this, that the majority of atheists in the world, outside of, say, China, but people who believe in like a Richard Dawkins, I'm going to tell you, Chinese people are superstitious. They don't believe in Richard Dawkins style atheism. Richard Dawkins style atheism is a hyper-puritanical iconoclastic version of Puritanism, and it is fairly white. I mean, this was especially true a decade ago. Atheism and the members of atheism, people who are pushing atheism, yes, they were Jewish, fine. But the vast majority of people joining this cult of atheism, this cult of hyper-rationality, skepticism, logic, cult of logic, man, the people joining this overwhelmingly white. Not to say that non-whites were excluded, but again, this was a very implicitly white movement. Now maybe it's changed somewhat today, but I think we can clearly see atheism as an attempt. And this hyper-liberalism, hyper-leftism, like Antifa, is a white supremacist organization. Why? Not because it excludes non-whites, but because it only attracts white people. Because it's a hyper-puritanical religion that takes base principles in the same way the Protestants took sola scriptura, they took the Bible and they took it to the next level, eliminating all tradition. Antifa does the same thing. Antifa takes the sola scriptura of our culture, which is anti-racism, anti-sexism, it takes this to the next level. And it is essentially a white supremacist subculture / religion at this point. That's the direction we're going in, amazingly enough. Where it turns out, where it ends up, is anybody's game, anybody's guess if it's going to succeed this time or if the ideas are too poisonous, too toxic. Because Judaism, legitimately has traditional concepts of patriarchy and fertility and fecundity and monogamy. I mean, there is a polygamy in early Judaism, in historical Judaism. But, I mean, there are civilizational aspects there. There are basic recognitions of biology or whatever. You could say that this new iconoclasm has been taken to an extent that is no longer sustainable. So the question is there some kind of syncretism? Is there some kind of Antifa stability that can come in and save Antifa as a new religion? That's a big question. That's a big question mark. I believe that liberalism can be turned into a new imperialism. I believe that with genetic editing, you can have a perfect transgender individual, and a lot of this stuff is going to be enabled by technology, and it's possible that it can then become a new world religion in the same way that Judaism then became Christianity and Islam, which are now world religions. In the same way that Hinduism gave birth to Buddhism, which is now a world religion. Okay, so we said all of that. We were talking about numerology, the quaternary, and the division of 2, and then we wanted to get to the division of 3. If we go from the monad to the dyad to the trinitary to the quaternary, and then we add the element of unity, which is number 5, and then we add the element of division, which is number 6, representing the division between the Goyim and Yehudim in Judaism, representing the hexagram, the 6-pointed star. Okay, what if we get to the number 7? Well, number 7 is a very lucky number, and the number 7 means we've taken the whole of creation, the whole of the cosmos, the quaternary. Not only have we added the aspect of unity, not only have we added the aspect of warfare and division, but we've also added the aspect of creation and the Trinity once again. So this says not only is the world in unity, not only is the world in division, but the world is actually in a state of creation. The world is in a state of evolution. This is what the number 7 represents. It represents evolution, good luck, good fortune, destiny. So the number 7 is very important And it's very important in Jewish mythology. You'll know if you read the Torah, nowhere does it say, and the hexagram shall be the symbol of the Jews. The hexagram develops as the prominent symbol of the Jews because Judaism develops over time as this radical exclusionary religion, doesn't seek to proselytize. That's not how it was initially. Judaism initially was a religion that converted non-Jews by force often. So Judaism did not begin off as a religion which embodied the numerology of the number 6. That developed over time, especially as Judaism lost its warrior element. It lost the aspect of soil. They were expelled largely from Palestine, and they colonized much of the Mediterranean in Greece and Rome, and then eventually northern Europe, and set up a base in Europe to spread all over the world. So that aspect, the number of 6, the number of division, didn't really develop in Judaism during the time when the Torah was actually being written. It developed later with rabbinical Judaism, the Judaism of the Pharisees. So that's an aspect of modern Judaism. Judaism has continued to evolve and to change with the Talmud and with Reform Judaism and with new aspects. Judaism which rejects traditional religious Judaism, but which is still uniquely Jewish, such as the Sabbateans, such as the Frankists, and further developments with atheistic Judaism. You could say Anton LaVey, his Satanism is another sect of Judaism, but which proselytizes to non-Jews. You could talk about Ayn Rand. This is the way that Kevin MacDonald looks at Judaism, is you have Jewish intellectual movements. Okay, so that's the way he looks at it as Judaism continues to evolve. It continues to split off into these multifarious movements. And that is one way to analyze it. But the number 7 was very important to the ancient Jews at a time when the number 6 was not so important. The number 7 was very important. Number 7 represents evolution, represents creation within the cosmos. And it's a very lucky number. It's a very good number. The number 8 then represents the quaternary plus the quaternary. So what is that? It's mundane. It's repetition. It represents the recursion. It represents reincarnation. The number 8 itself, a figure 8, represents on its side infinity, right? So it represents just the repetition of things. It's neither good nor bad. It's not masculine. It's not feminine. It's not conflict. It's not war. It's not unity. It's not harmony. It's not any of those things. It's just repetition. So if I play notes on a piano for you, I wish I had my piano right now. I don't need it. But if I had my piano in front of me, if I play one note, that is unity. If I play 2 notes, that's division. If I play 3 notes, that's a chord. And it can be minor or major. If I play 4 notes, well, that can be a whole scale. If I play, well, now we're adding on too many notes. What I really mean to say, if we talk about the distance between notes, right? So the distance between one note and the other, if I play 1 note, that's a unity. 2 notes, that's discord. 3, if I space of 3, so 1. I might have to get out the old piano. I might have to, because this is too difficult. I need to find my piano charger. Are you guys patient enough? Are you going to wait? I need you guys to get pumped up. I need some, this is the problem. It's always a contention between trying to be more obscure, but then also, how am I going to get some? How am I get some people? I need some for these dull times when you're looking for a piano charger, because you can't pause the video because Photo Booth is the worst. You don't have a pause button. How terrible is this? You don't have a pause button. It's making me angry enough. I'm not going to find the piano charger. But let's just take the piano and let's play C, C. So if we play C, that's a unity. But then C, D, bah, bah. If you play them both together, it makes a dissonant sound. But then if you go 1, 2, 3, and you play C and E, then that's another La. It's a good sound. If you do a 4th, that's also a good sound. It's not as good as this one probably, but it's still good. And if you do this one, that's very good because now we've got a chord with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm probably off pitch. I don't have perfect pitch. And then 6, we're kind of getting back in the discord area. If we start to count in the black notes, 1, 2, that's not that great. This is 3, This is 4, which is a minor chord. 5 is a major chord. 6, we're getting back into some weird minor territory perhaps. 7, that can be good, right? 8, that's also good. So we're just playing around with musical notes there without any sound. Disappointing, I don't know where the piano charger is, or the way to plug it into the wall. That's a real letdown. I guess you didn't, at home, you guys didn't cheer loud enough for the piano, so it didn't manifest. But we were talking about the nature of 8, and 8 just being repetition of things. It's not really an exciting number. 8's a pretty boring number. But then you have 9, and 9, we're getting back to the number 10. Remember, the 10 is the addition of all the numbers of the tetracty, so 10 just means completion of the system. But if we're thinking about it in terms of repetition, then 9 is the whole system plus the number 5. So we've repeated the system twice, and then we went back to unity. And we said, all right, unity rules over the whole thing. I think if we look at the Tetragrammaton or different esoteric Judaism, numerology, whatever, I need to crack my upper back. It's not going to crack. I don't know how to get it in an extreme position to crack it. But we have the Tetragrammaton, and I think if you look at there's like a tree. Maybe if we look at a Tetragrammaton, and we look up what this looks like, Tetragrammaton, I know there are different aspects, I know there are different aspects of Judaism, of the Jewish God. Let's see, aspects of Yahweh. Let's see if that pops up. Aspects of Yahweh. I want to get to, there's like a tree. I'm looking for a picture here. Presence of the Tetragrammaton. I'm looking for a picture of tree of aspect of God. And let's see, Tree of Life Kabbalah. Oh, here we go, Tree of Life Kabbalah. Let's read about this. I can't read that. Okay. Kether, no titles, just God is. Binah, Lord of established strength, abundance, material work, sorrow, dominion, love, harmonious change, peace restored, strife, loss and pleasure, defeat, Lord of perfect work, earthly power, Lord of victory, Lord of valor, Lord of victory again, Lord of unstable. This is so weird. Lord of oppression, Lord of wealth, Lord of ruin, Tree of Life, different worlds. The world of archetypes. Okay, this makes more sense. The world of archetypes, the creative world, the formative world, the material world. So the world of archetypes is like the Platonic forms, and then the creative world, the process of creation, the formative world, the creation in process, perhaps, and then the material world. Very reminded of Steiner here. First aspect, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The fourth aspect is the destroyer. Tree of Life, Kabbalah. 10 nodes, different archetypes, 22 lines connecting the nodes, 3 columns in a common category, lines in a path. Tree represents divine emanations of God, and the symbolic configuration is shown. Tree of Life represents different aspects, energy, Ein Sof, abyss. Okay, let's try to go through this one by one. First, there is Keter, which is thought of the product of the contraction of Ein Sof into a singularity of infinite energy or lightness. Kabbalah is primordial energy. So that's that infinite chaos we talked about. Second stage is Chokmah, or wisdom, the stage at which the infinitely hot and contracted singularity expanded forth into space and time. Thought of as pure dynamic energy of infinite intensity, forever propelled forth at faster than light. So, I don't know, that still sounds like chaos to me. Next comes Binah, or understanding, primordial feminine energy, supernatural, supernal mother of the universe. So that seems again like feminine energy. First three spheres, abyss. Yeah, I don't really know what's going on here, but Steiner was definitely into this. Sephirot, tree of death in Kabbalah. Let's see, Sephirot, the Ein Sof, 10 Sephirot. Okay, the first one is crown. Then you have wisdom and understanding. Then you have kindness, discipline, and beauty. Then you have eternity, splendor, foundation. And then you have kingship. So, these are all just good words, right? I don't really know. I don't really understand what is going on when you just have a bunch of good words and bad words together. I don't think I'm gonna get much from reading this Wikipedia article. The realm of evil, the other side. Oh, this is too much. I need to be prepared for this. There's demonology. Nama is the sister of Lilith. Gamaliel is the grand lady of all demons. Samael, desolation of God. Wow, this is a lot of demonology. Sukkoth, burning children. Whoa, this is really weird. Ravens of the burning of God. The openness, sharp weapons, Lord of darkness. Tagirion, grief and tears. Golachab, burning bodies. Golachab, burning bodies. I wonder if I can rearrange the words in Golachab to make another word. This name is half Hebrew and half Latin. The one adorned with fire. Gamchi. I don't even know if I should be reading these names. I feel like this is a bad idea. I don't know. I don't know what this is about. This is Crowley. Aleister Crowley. Yeah, I don't know if we should be reading these names. This is very dark stuff going on here. I'm just trying to find some positivity. But we got to the number 9, which represents the unity of repetition of reincarnation, perhaps. And the number 10, just the completion of the system. 5 plus 5, perfection doubled over itself. I think that might be enough. That's kind of a scary note to end on. There was a shooter in Dayton, Ohio, who was a purported Satanist. And I started talking, this conversation comes up. I don't try to start these conversations. I don't know if you believe that, but I really don't try to just start random conversations with people. I try to hold that inside and release it in YouTube form because I don't want to unleash that. I mean, I have once I start talking, it's very hard to interrupt me and to tell me to stop talking. So, I understand that, and I try not to force my lectures on people. And so on YouTube, you have the option to just exit the video at any time. But someone brought it up with me, this mass shooter, being a Satanist, or I mentioned that they were a Satanist, and they're like, oh, Satanism isn't bad, I'm a Satanist. And I was like, oh boy. People are playing with fire. You're playing with fire. You don't know what that word means. You're like, Satanists have never done anything wrong. The Church of Satan is actually, they're just a bunch of rational atheists or whatever. It's like, well, actually the Order of Nine Angles has and probably will kill people. And Jeffrey Epstein, probably on some level, was a Satanist. And do you want to be associated with Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you want to be part of the elite. Maybe you want to be powerful, and you think that being buds with Jeffrey Epstein, like Donald Trump, is going to be the way to get you into power. And maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you're just objectively correct. Maybe you're just true and right and correct about that. But it is, people who just jump into that It's funny. It's like there's this high-low versus the middle. You have really low-class white people who play around with Wicca and Satanism, and who are just really, low-tier leftist people. You have no power. You don't want to deal with them. They're kind of annoying. And then you have high-level people who probably are, on some level, connected in with all of these Aleister Crowley type stuff. I mean, Aleister Crowley was pretty high up in British society. So, there are probably all these people who really are connected. If you look at a J. Dyer analysis or something, the entertainment industry, everyone, they're probably all connected on this with some level. But if you just, as an amateur, you're like a Styx Hexenhammer type, and you're like, well, I'm going to study the occult, and then I'm going to have all this power, and it's going to be awesome. It doesn't exactly work out that way, that you can just start, worshiping the occult and just jump up. I mean, it's like, here's the way I would say about this. I'm going to try not to get into this topic too deeply, but Jews don't talk about Judaism to an open audience, to a public audience, in the same way that they talk about Judaism among themselves. And that's not necessarily wrong or nefarious. That's not even a negative thing. In the same way that, like, if you have a group of men together, they might talk about manly things differently than the way they would talk about those things around women. So the context, the audience is important here. So, if Jeffrey Epstein is a Satanist, or the people controlling him are the people who impelled him to commit suicide, whatever, we can have all kinds of crazy theories. Those people could be in some way interested in Aleister Crowley or esoteric things or whatever. There was that term Pizzagate that was thrown around that has a lot of connotations with really Alex Jones tier stuff that's misdirecting people, misleading people, deliberately spreading false information to discredit other things, which may be true, may not be true. But anyway, if people are really involved with that, they're not going to talk about it publicly. People who are involved with that don't talk about it publicly. It's esoteric, meaning you don't talk about it on YouTube. You don't say, well, I'm a Satanist. You don't go up to people and you don't talk like that. So these people who just casually, these middle class or low class white people who identify as Wicca or Satanist or pagan or whatever, and they're interested in this kind of stuff, this Styx Hexenhammer tier stuff, they're not real occultists, because a real occultist, a real esoteric person, would not be on YouTube sharing their ideas, so they wouldn't publicly share their ideas. They keep it concealed, they keep it private for the initiated only. When they're in their secret rituals, that's when they talk about these things. When they're among their own, that's when they talk about these things. That's when they reveal these things. Or they talk in coded language. You saw with Pizzagate, oh, I have a handkerchief for you, I have pizza for you, I have pasta for you. They use coded language, they use obscure language. This is how they talk. They talk as someone who has been initiated. So it's very sad and superficial to see people calling themselves Satanists and so on. It's like, a real occultist would never do that. You're literally you're understanding. You think you're above. You think, I'm so smarter than the masses. Everyone's like sheeple, and I'm into the esoteric, and I'm so smart. No, because you're talking about it publicly, which an esoteric occultist would never do. Right? So, I don't know. We can ask, what am I doing here? What am I doing by critiquing those people? And then I'm talking about esotericism openly. Well, I'm not part of any esoteric group with rituals and power or anything like that. I'm just a dude on the internet. I'm just, as I learn, I talk. I learn and I talk. I talk about what's interesting to me. So I'm not here like identifying as part of a powerful group and saying, yeah, I'm part of this group and everyone else is so dumb. That's not what's going on. What's going on is we're just talking, we're just observing, we're just describing. That's what it's all about. So I don't know. People recently, YouTube has gotten in a conflict with more and more people. It looks like YouTube as a platform more and more is a platform which excludes the right wing, which is only for the left wing, which is fine. Because, frankly, I think censorship is a good thing. Now, I know, we've said different things in the past, But that's the theme of the channel. You always have to change your opinion. You can never hold on to one opinion too long, because that's dangerous. Then you become orthodox. Then you become dogmatic. We don't want that. We want to constantly be changing our opinion. And what I'm going to say here is that, of course, freedom of speech. If you're a Gen Z type of a person, if you grew up on the internet, just 10 years ago, Reddit was the free speech platform on the internet. Reddit had all kinds of things that are now considered banned from Reddit. Reddit has transformed radically. With the level of censorship, they said, we'll never ban a subreddit. And then first they came for people that they described as pedophiles. And then, they gradually expanded their reach to the right-wing people, and that's typically how it goes. So, things have changed rapidly in the last 10 years. It's all going in the same direction. You can't keep the same opinion for too long, or else you just don't have a place on these platforms. And frankly, if we look at Europe has a lot of speech laws, and I think that's to the benefit of Europeans, that these speech laws create esotericism. They force people to be esoteric, because if you're open, you're going to jail. So, and I think that creates a creative space. If you look at the Freemasons, they developed under threat of jail. If you look at Wilhelm Marr and Bruno Bauer, and you look at Giuseppe Mazzini, and a lot of these people involved in the 1848 revolutions, they developed under an oppressive, censorious environment. And that was, it was a creative force. It was a force of Thanatos. Censorship is a force of Thanatos. And so I embrace that masculine spirit of Thanatos, not as something, I'm not censoring other people. I'm not calling for people to be shut down. That's not the point here. I'm not advocating for censorship in a positive sense, in the sense that, I want to censor my enemies, and I wish the left wing didn't have a chance to speak. I'm not advocating censorship in the sense that I feel I should be the dictator who presides over the world and decides what will be censored and not be censored. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it from a masculine position of authority. I'm saying it from a position of censorship engenders, to put it another way, hardship engenders innovation and creativity. And so that spirit of Thanatos, as it bears down upon us, in order to survive, we're going to have to be very creative and very smart. And absent that spirit of Thanatos, people just are dumb. People just wear armbands and march in the streets and engage in historical revisionism and worship of cultures which are not authentic, and times and spirits and everything. And they're worshiping dead forms, and they're allowed to do that because it's edgy and it's violent and it's provocative, because that's the demonology of our society. They just take that which is evil. They say, everyone calls this evil, so I'm going to identify that way. That's what the Dayton shooter did. He saw, Satanism is quote-unquote evil. I will identify with it because I think it's cool. So I don't think that is cool. I don't think that just adopting something as a big middle finger to society is the right way to go about things. I think you have to ground yourself in fundamental principles, and censorship forces people to go back to principles, because censorship attacks the superficial. Censorship attacks symbols. Censorship attacks aesthetics. Censorship does not attack deep principles. It can't. It can't work on that deep philosophical level, because at that point it has to be intelligent censorship. And it's not. Censorship is done by mid-level proles, church ladies, cat ladies. These are the types of people who actually are engaged in the censorship. Or computers, artificial intelligence. Can't tell. It doesn't understand the philosophy of your ideas or your principles. It picks up on keywords. So by forcing people not to use the keywords, we have to really investigate, what is our deep philosophy? What are we actually getting at? So that's an interesting concept. So I think in a way censorship makes you stronger. I think the Jewish people got stronger because the Jewish people were oppressed. Every pogrom against the Jewish people made the Jewish people a little bit hardier, a little bit more cunning, a little bit stronger, a little bit more resilient, a little bit more anti-fragile. So I think that is the way that I look at the future. The future is very hard. There's going to be censorship. There's going to be propaganda. There's all kinds of hedonistic, impulses that we're being bombarded with from advertising, moment to moment, social pressure, people trying to draw us into their unhealthy addictions. It's all around us, everywhere, and everyone's making this hypocritical argument of like, oh, well, no one's perfect, so you can't judge anyone, and I'm not a perfect person, therefore I guess you can do whatever you want, and we all do bad stuff, and therefore we should just have no standards. That's very tempting. It's very tempting to say, oh, well, I did bad things yesterday, so I might as well do them again today. Or, I did bad things in the past, so I'm not going to hold myself to higher standards. I'm not going to force myself to improve. Thanatos, death, censorship, this spirit forces us to go toward evolution. It forces us to improve and to be hardier and to survive. And that which doesn't survive passes away from a platform like YouTube, and that which does survive grows stronger and stronger. So that's what we're trying to do. And if that means we have to be left-wing, and I've done this before, I've talked about the left versus the right, and how we could change those words around semantically to identify as left-wing rather than right-wing. We've talked about that before, and people didn't really buy it. So, we might have to keep pushing that envelope. We might have to keep pushing further, more and more to the left wing, and rejecting the right more and more in more substantial ways, as a matter of survival, but also just exploring this space. There's a space, and you see it in Fuentes or Carlson or Sam Hyde or a lot of these different people, where it's like there's clearly something right-wing about them, right? They're clearly on the right wing in some way, but there's this left-wing spice to them. And you have this mixture together. So they're exploring this conceptual space, which has not been explored for a long time, where it's like you're either a conservative, you're in the majoritarian 50% right wing, or you're in this minority of Antifa, minority of the Weather Underground, minority of the hippie culture, or whatever. You're in this minority. Well, now things have flipped, and the left wing is orthodox, and that's the majority of people, and the right wing is still typecast as the 1950s Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, boomer generation. And so there's now this vast space that's opened up between the left and the right, whereas before it was like you can either be the 99% that's right-wing Christian conservative, or it can be the 1% that's a zany anarchist, communist, whatever, having all these different factions and flavors. But now it's flipped on us, where the 99% really is some form of a leftist, liberal, Democrat, whatever. Even Republicans are liberal Democrats. By the definitions of the word, they believe in democracy, they believe in classical liberalism, they believe in capitalism. They are liberal Democrats. Even the most hardcore Bill O'Reilly boomer conservatives, right? So there's this conceptual space that's been opened up where the majority of people are liberal Democrats, and then there's this flowering that the same way you saw the left, the communists, the anarchists, the syndicalists, all of the in-between, you're seeing this conceptual space in the right wing where you can be right wing, but then you can explore, and I'm going to sneeze, and I'm sorry because I can't pause the video, but I can finish the thought, which is that the right wing has the ability to look at the vast enormity of the cultural dominance of the left and to interject a right-wing spice. Because really, what we were looking at before, we were looking at a culture which was right-wing, and leftists like Marx were throwing spice on it. And Marx was saying, well, we're going to throw some spice over here, spice over there. Now, we live, rather than a right-wing soup with a left-wing spice, we live in a left-wing soup with a right-wing spice. So, Marx is a racist, Marx is a sexist, anybody who's an old white man can be criticized, and blah, blah, blah. Biden is a racist, Biden is a sexist, right? So we're living in a left-wing soup, and we have some right-wing spice. And we can throw it in wherever we want. We can mix different. We can have turmeric. We can have ginger. We can have, what other kinds of spices? Cinnamon. We can throw some cinnamon spice in there. We can get all crazy. And we can mix different kinds of spices. And people are going to try to say, no spice allowed, no spice here. But we're going to keep throwing spice in the soup. And it's creating different forms of soup. There's an inversion again between a majoritarian right culture and majoritarian left culture. We've made this inversion. Paradoxically, it seems unsustainable, and certainly without the intervention of technology, it probably will be unsustainable. But we can still throw in some right-wing spice, and we're going to keep mixing this soup until we get to some stable, steady state, where this is actually, we've reached a sustainable culture once again. We're not there, and it's going to be a struggle because we're throwing in the spice and people are hitting dead ends. They're hitting their head against the wall. It's not a very tasty soup because they're running into censorship, because they're running into losing the culture wars. They're trying to fight. You got people who are still trying to fight the gay marriage debate. It's like you're long gone on that one. So throwing in the spice, it's all about getting spicy. Getting spicy is the theme of the channel. So if we have to go fully onto the left wing to do that, then we'll do that. I mean, we'll do whatever it takes. We'll embrace a kind of liberal esotericism where we say liberalism obviously doesn't work as a system, but it is a system of controlling the masses that's going to get us to the next place in evolution. We can explore ideas like that. We can explore the range of allowed ideas, because if we do it in the right way, in the spicy way, we're going to be we're going to make progress. We're going to make progress. We're going to actually interact with the culture. We're not just going to ghettoize ourselves in a space. Remember, the evolution of Judaism did not begin as a ghetto. The evolution of Judaism began as a conquering culture that conquered other cultures and assimilated them 12 tribes into its culture and had a kingdom, had an empire, Jewish empire. That was then defeated, but then they spread all over the Mediterranean. They colonized. They weren't existing in ghettos. The ghettos really only came much, much, much later as there was a European Christian reaction, and they were always trying to get out of the ghetto, merchandise, interact with the aristocracy, money lend, anything to get out of the ghetto, and then they were finally emancipated. So the desire of Jews was never to be in the ghetto. There's always a separation that exists in Judaism, but it's not to the point of ghettoization. Ghettoization was not a favorable, desired outcome. You might say Stefan Molyneux made the argument that ghettoization was desired by the rabbis, and maybe that's true to an extent, but ultimately I think the world historical spirit of Judaism is not a ghettoizing spirit. It's a cosmopolitan spirit, to go out there and mix around with everything, at least intellectually. Throw a little Jewish spice in the music industry, throw a little Jewish spice on Hollywood, whatever. You throw in your spice, and that's what I see. Space to spice it up. That is rather than ghettoizing, rather than having a dogmatic, exclusionary ideology or any of that. You don't need that. You just need to throw in spice. And that's that fertile combination of opposites we talked about, the masculine and the feminine. We have a culture that wants to cut us away and cut us off from the culture and say, no, you're not allowed here. You're a bad thinker. You're a bad person. And they want to cut us off and separate us and ghettoize us to the point that they don't need false flags, because people really are so ghettoized and psychologically isolated that they really do go out and do violent things. But we don't want that. We don't want to be ghettoized. We want to get out there. We want to interact with the culture, and we want to do it in a way that is not, again, that is not self-ghettoizing. And I think that was the origin. Unfortunately, the alt-right brand became a ghettoized brand, where it became orthodox white nationalism. But initially, the alt-right was not supposed to be that. That's not how it presented itself. As it was an anti-ghettoization. It was, we're going to spice everything up here, and we're just going to, it was the spice right. And that's something I think is interesting. We can explore that. We can do some tasty samplings of different spicy mixtures. And maybe you taste something and you're like, whoa, that's a little bit too intense, bro. That's got too much habanero. But at least it was an experience. It's like you go out and you try exotic food. It's like, maybe I'm not going to eat that 3 meals a day, but it was nice to just try something new every once in a while. I think people get bored. People on the left get bored. I think increasingly people on the right are getting bored of the same old dogma, same old doctrine being pushed in the same exact way. Oh, we're just, and it's boring. It's boring. So we're going to spice it up. We're going to open doorways. Are you vibing with me? Are you getting with me here? So I don't know. I actually don't have any further points. I'm just restating the same thing over and over again. Thank you guys for listening. I don't know why you watch these videos, and I'm speaking specifically to the commenters who say, I don't understand what you're talking about. This doesn't make sense. You have a bunch of different arguments, and none of them are logical. Okay, I don't understand why you're watching. And I don't appreciate you watching. You need to stop. If you don't understand, please shut off the video and go to something a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to understand, because I'm trying to break it down. I'm saying things 6 ways to Tuesday here. I'm saying things over and over again in different ways to try to get it across. So if you can't understand this, baby steps, go back to 17th grade. You're not ready to graduate. Go back, go watch some more basic material, we'll say. And then come back maybe when you're ready. But you're obviously not ready. You need to do some more reading or watching. You need to evolve. And maybe you're never going to evolve. And in that case, bye, see ya. We don't need you. You know, we can always dumb it down. It's easy to dumb things down. It's easy. Eventually someone can just dumb it down and say, well, this is the way it is. We're going to dumb it down. We're going to make some axiomatic principles. We're going to tell you a story. We're going to dumb it down. You can do that. I mean, you could dumb it down to pretty simple stuff, and to the point where you don't even need to know anything. You just need to know if you have a question, go ask the priest and he'll tell you the answer. Things can always be dumbed down. It's difficult to scale things up. That's the difficult thing. So again, I don't know why people watch the videos. I know why I make the videos, because it's fun. Because I like to talk, because it's enjoyable. I don't know. And that, for me, is the fundamental thing. It's not about getting on here on YouTube and telling the truth. That's not what it's about. I'm not taking this so seriously, just because I've seen so many people rise and fall. I'm not taking it so seriously that I'm like, the truth must come out, and I'm sorry, I might get banned for this, but I just really need to say something to you guys. No, that's not what's going on at all. Of course, to talk about mundane topics is boring. I don't want to be sequestered into that. But I'm not on this self-immolating mission to tell the truth at any price. And if they kick me off the platform, then that just means I did my duty and I told the truth. I'm not Spangler's Roman soldier at Vesuvius, standing at my post, sticking the sword of truth in the ground and standing fast and allowing the wave of censorship to flow over me like a lava flow. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm doing this to have fun, to add spice to life, to experiment things, to turn them over, and to usually we look at it this way, but what if we turned it upside down? Doesn't it kind of look different in that way? And that really makes you think. So it's a fun thing to do. So it's not very fun if we get kicked off the platform, but there is a lot of fun. There's all cracks and crannies and nooks that we can get into. And I'm really on repeat here, so we do have to end the video. And thank you for listening. I will see you next time, and I do say bye-bye.